was lucky enough to be able to shoot with the C300 Mark III back in the spring. I was very excited by the image quality and the form factor. The overall feel and responsiveness of the camera was truly a massive step up from the C200 that we had been using up until that point. What's changed, of course, since then is that production has kind of restarted and client work has started coming back in again. For example, we've just done a shoot for one of our clients where we've been taking ingredients that they use in their drinks and using coloured LEDs to change the colour of the background to match the graphics on their products, and then the ingredients from their products kind of rising and falling in slow motion in front of the lens. One of the things that was really crucial was that we were able to quickly play back in between takes and see not just, a real-time playback, but a conformed in-camera slow motion playback. The speed at which you can flick back between playback and recording with the C300 Mark III, it still kind of blows my mind that the processing in this camera is just such a huge evolution from previous Cinema EOS cameras. It really is incredibly snappy, and we were able to check playback, flick back into recording, do another take, flick into playback again. It's so much snappier. The C300 Mark III has really changed the kind of speed at which we're working, which is fantastic. A lot of post-processing goes on, particularly when you're doing pack shots and product shots for clients, and we need the extra headroom that we can get with a very big data-rich file that we have with the Cinema Raw Lite. What's great about the C300 Mark III is that we're getting that and maintaining 120 frames per second. The dual gain output of the C300 Mark III is really now starting to make me realise just how useful it is, in particular for HDR workflows, where I'm finding there's so much less to do with the image to kind of prep it and get it in a space where it's going to sing as an HDR deliverable. We used to have to do a bit more work, particularly in the shadows, to clean the image up. And of course that's what DGO does. It cleans up the shadows, and it also makes more usable information in the higher luminance and high saturation parts of the signal. So it's kind of optimizing the camera really for HDR deliverables. It's a more rounded camera in terms of the formats, the codecs that it supports. It's certainly a more practical camera in terms of usability. The form factor, it's just so nice to work with it in that package. And although we haven't yet had a situation where we are pairing the C300 Mark III with a C500 Mark II, I know that time will come. And I'm looking forward to those times where we get to really take advantage of the form factor, the compact and lightweight nature of the body. I know it's going to be a big deal for us. I know it's going to make things quicker and easier for us and for our camera operators when we're in those situations. The experience of using this camera is a huge evolution for us. It really feels like as a company we're able to step up now. Clients that we've worked with for a long time, even they're sort of noticing an increase in the image quality and certainly an increase in the flexibility of what we can offer them. That's a big thing, that's a big impact for a company, and certainly for me, I'm excited to bring the C300 Mark III to projects that we work on throughout the rest of this year and beyond, and the increase in quality and the increase in capability that we're able to offer our clients in the future.
Hello and welcome to a rather special live Q&A, which is of course part of Canon's virtual trade show, Canon Vision. Now, as you all know, in the absence of IBC this year, doing a real event with actual people, with real interaction and networking, Canon's had to think outside the box and take things virtual once again, following the big product launch that they had back in July with the R5 and R6. Now, for those of you wondering who I am, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that's probably a lot of you, unless you watched the last session. My name's Lucy Hedges. I am the technology editor for the Metro newspaper in the UK. I'm also a presenter for the BBC Travel Show. Just, all-round gadget mad enthusiast. So I am really honoured and chuffed to be your host today and to chair these sessions. Now, as you know, Canon announced some pretty exciting products yesterday and a range of inspiring products, filmmakers, cinematographers, and the broadcasting industry on a whole. So we've got these new products that people can sink their teeth into. So let's just do a quick recap of what was launched. So headlining the announcements is the EOS C300. This is a digital camera with a body that resembles a mirrorless stills camera. Notably, the C300 uses Canon's RF lens mount, making it the first cinema EOS camera to adopt the company's newest lens system. And it's the most compact and lightweight cinema EOS camera to date. It's destined to become one of the best cinema cameras around. It's fully loaded with features like high frame rate 4K shooting at 120 frames per second, with audio recording, improved dual pixel autofocus, 13 customizable buttons, and dual SD card slots. So there's loads of features that this camera now brings to the table. And what we're looking at here essentially is a camera that's taking super 35mm movie making into an exciting direction, and a camera that's got the potential to really transform the way films are made, and a bit of kit that's been designed to meet the diverse and ever-evolving recording requirements of the industry. Now, the EOS C300 is also compatible with the newly announced mount adapter. So it's giving users access to the extensive range of Canon EF mount lenses while paving the way to expand creative capabilities for even more shooting freedom. And then finally, demonstrating Canon's commitment to lens innovation, there's a CJ20 EX5B. It's a high-performance broadcast lens that's been engineered to resolve an outstanding level of detail across an equally outstanding zoom range. So that's the products. Let me give you a little taster of what you can expect over the course of the day. So Canon's basically invited a hand-picked selection of guest speakers and a brilliant bunch of inspirational and all knowledgeable individuals from different corners of the planet to talk about their experiences in the industry, what projects they're working on, and of course, the Canon kit they use to do it. So it goes without saying that this is a brilliant opportunity for you guys to hear some really great stories, to get inspired by fellow filmmakers, and just really have a chance to enjoy yourself and sink your brains into everything Canon. We're going to be diving into quite a diverse variety of interesting topics, so you made the right choice tuning in. It's definitely worth noting as well that the sessions will be available to rewatch later on the Canon Vision platform in case you missed one, or you just want to watch one on repeat because you really enjoyed it. You should also make sure you check out the Canon Pro social media channels to take a look at more content shot with the newly launched products. And of course, loads of other cool content sits on that platform as well. Just head to @Canon EMEA Pro on Facebook and Twitter. You know exactly what to do. We're not new to social media. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of what this session, what you can expect from this session. So our next Q&A is a good one. Joining me is filmmaker and colorist Ollie Kenchington to discuss how the C300 Mark III positively impacts workflow. Also joining me on this session is Media Metal from Canon UK, and she's an all-knowledgeable product specialist from the Canon camp who's going to handle the more technical side of things. Now, before we kick off with Ollie, I just want to say we'd love to hear your questions. If you've got anything you want to ask our guests, our DOPs, our experts, we'd love to hear them. So make sure you fire those questions over so we can get those answered. Don't be shy now. And on that note, I think we should start. Ollie, how are you?
I'm very well, Lucy. Thank you very much for hosting me today.
It's really good to have you on this session. So we've not got a lot of time, and I know we've got a lot to get out of you, so I'm going to dive straight in. You've sat in a lot of roles across the industry. Your career is vast. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your industry experience?
Yeah, sure. So these days, my main role is as a colorist. That's kind of my bread and butter. But I've been shooting longer than I've been doing anything else. I spent a huge chunk of my career editing as a freelance editor. These days, I run a corporate film production company in the UK. So I have a hand in sort of everything from directing to shooting, post-production workflow. I color everything that we do. I also run a company which is a colour grading platform, but I actually started out in fine art, so that was my educational kind of background, what I studied at university. And it wasn't until I got to university that I first sort of started messing around with cameras, trying to emulate people like Steve McQueen, who at the time was an installation video artist. And that was where kind of video started for me. That was back in 2000, 20 years ago now. When I graduated, quickly realised that there was no money in becoming a video artist, so I started to kind of branch out. That's kind of the general trajectory for me.
Yeah. So you're a massive all-rounder. You've kind of, sunk your teeth into different elements of the industry and found the bit that you like. The bit
I think it really helps, particularly when you're running a company, a production company. I think it's really important to have that good technical understanding of all the different disciplines. I mainly wear my colouring hat these days.
Yeah. And what have you been working on recently?
So obviously with lockdown this year, things have looked very different. I also do an awful lot of training. Over the years, I've trained for Apple, for Adobe. I'm a Blackmagic certified trainer. And that's been a real godsend this year, to be honest, where productions have wound down. I've picked up in areas of doing training and consultancy and all kinds of various different kind of elements from within that business. Excuse me. So demand from that side of things, I think, has been great. A load of people who had nothing better to do, particularly if they're on furlough, to kind of up their game, really. So I was doing both live webinars, but I also have online training courses. Production kind of started ramping back up again, sort of for us in May. I think the first kind of going out with a camera and shooting job that I did was for the RHS, who are one of our clients, the Royal Horticultural Society, for those of you that aren't familiar with them. And in fact, we've been doing a whole series of stuff around their gardens, which has been ramping up. I'm doing more of that next week and throughout the autumn. So, excuse me. So that's kept us busy, and various other things as well.
So you've been, it's not lucky, it's not necessarily the right word, especially in dark times for people, but you've been, it's been great that you've been busy, been kept busy with work. Sadly, it's not been the case for a lot of people, No,
exactly. Yeah, I'm very thankful.
And that's, I'm getting the impression that's because, you are so well-rounded, you do so many things that the opportunities for you to work are just in abundance, because you're like, I can just dip into that and I can dip into that.
Yeah, it helps. I run 3 companies, so it would have been a real bombshell if all 3 of them had suffered. But the Coro Films, our production company, definitely wound down to a halt for a good period of time. Coro Academy, our training, as I say, picked up hugely. Massive increase in amount of stuff coming through that. And a new business I launched back in February, which was in theory terrible timing, was an online colour grading platform. And again, being an online platform actually benefited a lot of people who would have been going to post houses to finish their films. We kind of picked up a lot of that work, and so Just Grade It has been incredibly busy over the whole period as well. So yeah, very lucky.
And would you say the kind of the influx of work that's coming in is a byproduct of the fact that things aren't, the industry is not moving as it was before? So a lot of people are doing things at home, people are doing things online, and it's just been quite handy for you to be able to provide that training, provide that platform. Yeah,
absolutely. I think the whole, like a lot of industries, I think you could say the same thing about green technology and aviation technology and stuff. There's a lot of industries that have been massively impacted, and it's brought forward change that was already coming. And I think that's definitely happened in our industry. I think things were already moving in a certain direction, and it's just accelerated that to a certain extent. And people who weren't working and weren't embracing that already have quickly had to get into that lane, and a lot of time that meant sort of relearning or training in new areas. So yeah, it's been a big change for everyone. Yeah.
So let's talk about challenges. What are the current challenges of the industry from your side of things?
It's difficult from my point of view because of having such a strong focus on post-production. It's a weird one because, as I say, there was a huge amount of work, particularly to begin with. But like a lot of other people, as soon as that post-production finished and production hadn't ramped back up again, there was this huge lull that came. For me, it was quite delayed. It kind of hit in July, which is when a lot of industries were then starting to ramp back up again. So from a post-production view, that was really tricky to manage because you lost that sense of going through it with everyone else in a way, which is an odd thing, but you didn't feel like you were kind of part of that because I was very busy whilst everyone else was doing nothing.
Yeah.
And then when everyone else was starting to ramp back up again, I then got very quiet. So it was tricky personally. That was quite tricky to manage. Yeah. We obviously run a production company as well. We are now sort of more or less back to where we were in terms of production activity. Mm-hmm. And, for example, this RHS series that we're doing at the moment, being conscious of PPE and keeping crews small is a huge impact on the way that we work. Mm-hmm. But again, I kind of feel like we already had kind of got a bit of a name for creating very high quality content with relatively small crews. And that's always been quite an interesting thing for me. I've always very deliberately gone for that kind of niche in the market, and it's served us very well. Yeah. And so we're kind of used to working with only sort of 3-4 people to shoot what could potentially be quite big operations for other agencies potentially.
So without knowing it, you were more than prepared for the last 6 months, basically.
Yeah, my career of sitting in a dark room on my own and not affording big crews has been perfectly timed.
It's paid off. You might not have thought that.
I knew it would come. It took 20 years, but there we go.
And what do brands expect now? What do they expect from companies and people like you?
I think there's a huge emphasis on smaller, short-form content. I mean, again, our company kind of went for that because it's the type of stuff that you can produce in small crews very quickly, as you saw in that video that played just before. I mean, that was for one of our clients called the Wild Beer Co. Big international brand, millions and millions of pounds worth of sales, all internationally. But they themselves are based, on a farm about 15 minutes up the road in Somerset, where we're based. And I think that's a great opportunity. There's been a huge movement. I mean, there's been house prices in this area have gone up massively because loads of people have been moving out of city centres where they've noticed that actually it doesn't always work in your favour. And I think it is a much more connected world now. And working remotely has made people realise, well, do I need to be in sort of city centres and doing stuff? So I think that's changed both, industry's mindsets, but also clients' mindsets. So we've actually seen a big shift from London-based clients, which we've always had, to more sort of local West Country, Bristol's just up the road, Bath, down into the southwest, and that's lovely for me because it's nice to feel like you're supporting that kind of those local businesses. So that's changed, and people are, smaller companies that are investing money in creating online content, whereas before they probably didn't bother. They maybe just did stills, and videos kind of ramped up hugely in that area as well. Yeah,
it's cool. People are definitely, the industry's evolving, needs and wants are evolving. Companies, I feel, you've got to keep up or be fear of being left behind, really. And I think that's maybe what we're seeing. Companies and brands are, this knee-jerk response to the industry, and they have to evolve, otherwise they will get left behind.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that it's not just going to go back to the way it was. Even if everything gets resolved tomorrow, I think there's lots of positives that have come from working in these different ways, and people who have embraced those and running with those now, I think, are doing the best.
Yeah. So you've been using, as we saw in the video, the C300 Mark III, which came out. Can you tell us what you were doing with the camera and how you got on with it? I know you mentioned the beer project that you were working on.
Yeah, well, if we take that as a case in point, I mean, that's a very straightforward case of we couldn't do something with our equipment before, and the C300 Mark III meant we could do something. It's a very straight line in that sense for us. And I said in my VT in the beginning there about how being able to offer something to clients that you haven't been able to offer to them before is part of keeping and retaining and winning new business. And, at the end of the day, I'm a creative, yes, but I also run 3 businesses, and you have to make money. And so if you can offer things that you couldn't before, that's a huge win. In this particular case, we've never been able to offer both high frame rates and the kind of color control that we need, because with Wild Beer Co and a lot of our clients, they need color accuracy. They need their brand colors, their product colors to be 100% correct. And they need that to be consistent as well. And so when you're shooting something tricky, a backlit, strong color hue, LED scene, and you're trying to kind of capture those ingredients at high frame rates, there's two things that are very tricky to manage in those situations. One is focus, and the camera's autofocus system, the fact that it still works, the dual pixel autofocus at 120 frames per second is hugely valuable. But the fact that we could record at 120 frames in 4K cinema raw light, that's massive. From a post-production workflow, that's massive for us, because we can maintain and push the signal and do everything and correct out any situation, and also deliver multiple deliverables, SDR, HDR, whilst maintaining clean shadows without having to do lots of post-production work. There's lots of advantages that one single camera has brought in one fell swoop, essentially, to us and to our offerings, which, that's a huge thing. That really is a big impact for a small company.
Yeah. So it's really tidied your workflow, like while you're shooting and post-production, which is so important. Time is money, and time is important.
Yeah. Well, workflow is one of those words that lots of people band around, and you often mustn't. Do they really know what I mean? Are they saying that because they think they should say that? I guess this comes back to with me having a sort of a use case in production and post-production. It ties a very straight kind of line between what's acquired at the point of the camera and what's delivered to the client. I am directly involved in all of that, whether I'm shooting it or not, or editing it or not. So that makes me very disciplined in terms of color management, in terms of accuracy, and things that I think a lot of other people, particularly if they're new into the industry, they don't necessarily focus on. And then they wonder why it's such a battle to get this final thing that you hand off. It's incredible how easy, in a way, and I feel almost like I'm cheating, because actually the whole workflow becomes very easy when you just do certain things at certain times throughout that process. And the key point within that, I think, is having a camera that's faithful in terms of color reproduction and the robustness of the codec, the amount of data within the codec. That if you didn't have that, then it doesn't matter how disciplined you are, the camera isn't going to support that. So in this case, you've got a win-win.
Yeah. So is this, the best color accuracy you've seen on a camera?
Do you know what? It's interesting. One of my go-to very simple tests, if you gave me a brand new camera from any manufacturer and I only had it for 60 seconds, I would turn off all the lights in our studio, we've got very, very high quality 99 CRI color lights in our studio. They have to be very high accuracy. So I'd turn on our studio lights, I would stick a color chart, and I would capture a few seconds of it, and then you could have the camera back. After that, I can find out an awful lot about that camera's color reproducibility by inspecting that chart. And I do that with all cameras. Whenever I get them, whenever I'm trying them out, I do that. And as a colorist, I see material coming to us from just a huge range of cameras. So I really know, almost kind of like this thumbprint. You could play a game like, what camera is this from, and just see the chart. I really start to see the individualities of each camera. The fascinating thing about the C300, and interestingly, this test I've just done on the C70 last week when I was playing with it, and it's the same result as the C300 Mark III. It requires literally no adjustment at all, or the most minimal adjustment to hit the chromaticity coordinates for Rec 7 and 9, which governs where colors should sit in a normal HD video. And to see a vector scope and those colors plotted exactly where they are, that's very unusual. All cameras, even ones that you would typically go, that's a great camera. If you actually look at the completely unedited image, the raw image on a vector scope, there's always slight deviations from where the colors should be, and you have to slightly manipulate those. You just don't have that with the C300 Mark III, which, that's incredible. That's really, really good.
Yeah, so it's kind of a bit mind-blowing for you, really.
Yeah. Well, it makes my life easy. Again, it feels like I'm cheating. I'm picking a camera that means I have to do less work. And it's like, well done, Ollie, you really understand color management. And like, for me, it's just, well, no, I'm just picking a tool that makes my life easy.
The fact that you feel you're cheating is testament to the camera and its capability.
Exactly.
As someone, you know your stuff. So for you to say that you feel like you're cheating, this camera's, really up to its game.
When people send me rubbish from phones in, horrible codecs in low light and there's noise everywhere, you spend hours trying to correct that stuff. So that's the hard work. It's these cameras that make life easy.
I bet you probably don't miss those days where you spent hours trying to get the right colours and,
It's not fun. It's not fun.
So let's talk about your tech timeline quick, briefly. You know, you've been doing this for a long time. What kind of kit were you using at the start compared to, obviously, we know what you're using now, but what was it like back in the day? And how does it feel now to finally wave goodbye to that kind of technology and use something that just makes your life so much easier?
Yeah, well, I mean, the interesting thing about it is it's not a linear change over those 20 years. It's not, as incremental as you might think. And there's been a rapid development in recent years. I think we've seen that from all manufacturers, particularly from Canon, a huge ramp up in kind of capability. But the first cameras that I was using were big shoulder-mounted JVC, SVHS cameras, big clunk the tape in, tape-to-tape editing. Very quickly through university, I think it was only in my second year, they got, I think it was a Canon XM2, which is one of the first cameras that allowed you to record to mini DV tape, and it had a FireWire connection on it, and you could go straight into your Mac, in my case, and ingest that stuff straight from the camera. It wasn't real time; you had to sit there and wait in real time whilst it ingested. But that was novel. That was quite a big change. Yeah. So from 20 years ago, using the Canon XM2 to using the C300 Mark III, now the C70, all these other new cameras that Canon are bringing out, it's quite stark, the changes obviously that we've seen. But they've been fairly steady, and they just have ramped up massively in the last few years.
Yeah, I guess it's really, from your perspective, it's quite fascinating. It's just to see the evolution. It's quite amazing. There's a lot of people maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the game and haven't seen that kind of thing, or maybe wasn't in the industry back then. It's just, I think it's nice to have that position because it makes you appreciate the technology a little bit more, I think.
It does, and it means because things have been harder for us in the past, I had to be very disciplined. And as I say, that discipline remains, even though the tools have made it easier. So you end up, often people say, well, why should I have to be this camera? For example, when people are shooting RAW, I don't need to worry about white balance because it's shooting RAW. It's like, well, if you're ingrained, if these best practices and discipline are ingrained in the way that you work, it's not, all that means is that you're going to be able to save time later on. Yeah. So, for example, setting your white balance in RAW, well, that's useful information. If you manually white balance a camera, even though it's in RAW, that information is their metadata that the colorist sees. So they have a much better understanding of what was the color environment that you were working within. They don't have to guess. The simple things, that's just one example of where I think if you're just disciplined throughout that whole production pipeline, it makes life very easy at the end. And if it's already easy because the camera and the tools, for example, make it easy, those time savings you can then reinvest into creativity, maybe doing another round of edit that you might not have had time for, maybe getting more feedback from the client than you might have otherwise been able to do. And you can always reinvest that time, and you end up with something that's better than it could have been.
Yeah. So I know you touched on some of the features of the C300 Mark II that you really love, that really make your work environment a lot more consistent and efficient. But what other features in particular were you really impressed with that you want to hammer home to our audience?
Well, I think if I had to pick, I've mentioned the 4K 120 frame cinema raw light. That's great, but I think a more subtle but almost more impactful aspect of the C300 Mark III is the DGO technology in the sensor, because what that's doing without me having to be conscious of it too much is it's allowing the images to be far easier when we get to post-production, and in particular for HDR deliverables, because for a start, it's got this huge dynamic range. So it's managing to capture details in areas that would otherwise be tricky.
Yeah.
And when you've used a camera like that and go back to using, say, like a mirrorless or a DSLR or something with much, sort of 12, 13, 14 stops of dynamic range, it's interesting how you kind of forget how hard it is to manage that, particularly from a lighting point of view. If you have a camera with a low dynamic range, it puts far more emphasis on lighting, on reducing the differences, the dynamic range of the scene, so maybe pushing light into the shadows to bring them up and narrow your dynamic range of your scene. With the C300 Mark III, you're forgetting almost that you have to worry so much about that, because it's got such a much larger room for capturing all that information. So it creates a far more pleasing image just straight within the camera. But then once you start digging into that image in post-production for your grade, you realize, I don't have to add noise reduction to this very high dynamic range shot. I don't have to worry about, rolling off the high soft into those high luminance or high saturation areas, because they kind of get a little bit nasty and ragged. You actually realise that there's less to do with it, and it's a wonderful technology. The fact it's just in the background working in your favour is a big plus for this camera.
So camera choice, having the right camera from a post-production perspective is incredibly important. Some people might, you've actually made me realise a few things that I might not have taken into consideration, but there's this product line of things that needs to happen in order for everything to be consistent. And I think having the right camera from a post-production perspective is very important.
It really is, yeah. I mean, if you look at the way that feature films operate, I think you can learn a lot by looking at what happens. Even if you've just started in this industry, you look at what's going on at the top end. They do huge amounts of camera tests. They think about what are they shooting. They recreate those environments. They do camera tests. They're making sure they're picking the right cameras, the right lenses, the right workflow is in place to be optimized for a seamless pipeline throughout the entire process. At my end of the spectrum, in my part of the corporate filmmaking industry, that still applies. But what it means is I don't have the luxury of just picking whatever camera suits the situation. And there's more emphasis on me finding a camera that fits in more broadly into more situations. And I think that's really the ace up the C300 Mark III sleeve, is it's so adept in so many different kind of areas. It's a kind of a one trick. It's not a one trick pony. It's not just good at something. It's good at a lot of things, and pretty much anything that you might choose to point that camera at is very likely to come out better than potentially other choices of camera that you may have invested in.
A camera of many talents. I like that. And what would you say are the top post-production trends at the moment?
It's an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, there's a really quite a big move back to nostalgic kind of film looks, so to the point where I've got good friends who are really carving out a career shooting with 8mm, 16mm film, and where they are shooting digital, they're doing a lot of work in post to recreate film grain and film look, and that's weird. I mean, for a lot of the people who I know who are doing that, they're much younger than I am, and I wonder if perhaps because I've been doing this a lot longer and I've come from that background, I started out in black and white photography in 35mm film. I think I love all of the aspects of clean digital imagery and then what that kind of allows me to do in post. But generally there's this kind of nostalgic feel. And you see it with the Sumires, for example, Canon's prime lens range that have been kind of decoated in a way and kind of taken back to a more sort of organic and slightly, introducing aberrations that spent years getting rid of. It's an interesting time really, because there's a lot of nostalgia. I think there's a lot of people looking backwards, which is impacting in all parts of the industry, but particularly post-production.
It's really interesting, isn't it, when things kind of come back full circle? You think you've left something in the past, and then it comes back and it becomes almost as important as the technology and the what's happening in the present time. I find that really interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you're trying to marry that with a digital world, and certainly recreating the amount of effort that goes into digitally recreating an old worn image. There's some fascinating techniques. There's a great series on Netflix called Sex Education, and particularly in the first series, if you watch it carefully, they've got these very subtle vignettes on a lot of the show, which is meant to be it's meant to feel like it's present, but it could be the 80s. It's got a weird kind of style to it, but there's this subtle vignette where they've split the RGB of the signal, and so they've done that all in post, and it creates this slightly odd vintage lens look where it's like an old kind of VHS where like it's gone out of phase and the red, green and blue channels aren't quite in a line, but you only see it as it kind of graduates on into the corners of the frame. That's the type of thing that 5 years ago no one in a million years would have said, let's deliberately make this big headline TV show look rubbish in the corners and look at the old camera. It's permeating all different parts of the industry at the moment.
I agree. I'm with you. It's weird, but equally fascinating at the same time. And the amount of work and time and energy that goes into creating something that looks so nostalgic is quite impressive. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to welcome Media to the conversation. Hello, my love. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm good. Having a great chat with Ollie. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
You're welcome.
So why is offering cameras with multiple recording formats so important to Canon?
I mean, it is important for us to have a camera that covers or suits different needs for filming needs, any single production. I think the worst thing for a DOP is if they feel restricted or limited but what a camera they're using can do. Having that different formats gives efficiency and flexibility. And for most DOPs, they want to be challenged so it can push their creativity as well. Mm-hmm. Our products do deliver that. We have C200, for example, C300 Mark III that we're talking about today. We have the C500 Mark II that we had a session on earlier. All of these cameras offer Cinema Raw Lite, so you get all the benefits of Cinema Raw, but in terms of flexibility in post, but you get a smaller file without compromising on the quality. We have XFAVC, we have proxy recording, so we want to give basically the OPs that flexibility to fulfill the needs of their filming and then their workflow as well. Because they need to be prepared if they're shooting something. They need to be able to, they need to ensure that they're not going to have a problem when it comes to post-production. That post-production is not going to be costing them a fortune. And I think at the moment, again, with the restricted or limited budgets for productions, if you have one camera that can actually do a lot more for you, then that's a winner. Getting more but spending less. Pretty sure everyone wants that. And I think we are at a stage where, with the range of cameras that we have, different formats that each camera have. The C300 Mark III, for example, as I said, you have Cinema Raw Lite, you have XFAVC, the proxy recording, and even when it comes to XFAVC, you have the Ollie, and then you have long GOP. So if you want to record for longer, you want smaller files, then you do have that option.
Yeah. So ultimately, it's about equipping DOPs with just serious amounts of creative freedom. If they want to go down this path, they've got the kit to do that. This way, there's a bit of kit that will support that as well. Yeah.
You don't want them to feel limited by the camera they're using. And that's, as I said, the range we have, that's fulfill the needs of basically any filming needs, any requirements in pretty much every single production.
And how important is it then that Canon offers, compatible cameras that support, a different range of filming needs?
It obviously is.
Sorry. I'm talking about in a single production, basically. Yeah.
Obviously, as I said, different cameras. Our cameras do work together. So you can use a C300, for example, even with the latest addition to the cinema camera. So the C70, for example, with the 300 will be a great match. Both of them are having the geosensor. The great thing with the range of cameras that we have, whether it's the C300 Mark III, C500, the C70 that we announced yesterday, or even the R5, is you can actually shoot and then work with that footage and easily match the look of the video you're after. That's one thing that you don't have to worry about, and that's one thing that our cameras can deliver. We have obviously C-Log 2, C-Log 3, color matrix. So you have different ways of actually shooting to make sure that you can easily, as I said, mix the footage and match the look you're after.
Yeah. So we've just talked about some of the amazing things that can be achieved with Canon cameras, but what are some of the challenges you're seeing DOPs facing when it comes to workflow?
I think probably, if I'm not a DOP, but if I put a DOP hat on, I probably will say storage and processing power, because at the moment, with the increased need for higher resolution, people wanting 4K or 6K or even 8K, those files are going to be massive. You need to be able to basically have enough storage and then having enough processing power to work with the footage that you just shot. The worst thing, or probably one of the worst nightmare for a DOP, is obviously if that doesn't get managed, it can slow down the production. And then it can cost you money because it can take longer in post-production as well. And I'm pretty sure if you haven't budgeted for the post-production to take longer, obviously that can cause a problem. So storage, definitely. We have, again, going back to our range, the C70, for example, with 2 SD cards. SD cards have been around for years, as long as I can remember. Nowadays, you can get massive size, and they're actually a lot cheaper, so they're more accessible. And that's what DOPs are after. So they're after more accessible and a more affordable media. With the C300 Mark III, Cinema Raw Light, you can record internally, you can do that into a CF Express card. You don't have to worry about with other cameras if they're shooting RAW externally. You have to get additional equipment to do that, and then obviously that will have an impact on the workflow as well.
Yeah. Okay, Ollie, I've got a question for you. We touched on this earlier, but it'd be good to reiterate. How do you choose the right camera and format for the job? What's your thought process?
Yeah, it's quite straightforward, actually. It's first thing you need to think about is the output, the deliverable. So, where are you going and what are you trying to deliver at the end? And then you kind of work back from that. You have to weave in budget, obviously. You have to think, can I afford this workflow? I had a chat with a new client just yesterday. We had a meeting and they are shooting a drone display at the end of this year. So it's you may have seen these companies, they now have lots of drones with lights on them and they send out swarms of them and they can make like 3D animations in the sky. So I was talking to a new client who do this and they're doing stuff at the end of the year for kind of Christmas and New Year celebrations. Because of COVID, they want to reduce the crowds. And the good thing about these types of drones is they can be seen from miles around, so you don't have to have everyone in a small space for fireworks. So they want to shoot this and they want to package up a video for it, and I'm going to be doing all the grading for it. It's going to be nighttime. They want very high resolution because they're very small. So after talking about budgets, it's was put forward by me that the C500 Mark II would be the perfect camera. It's very good in low light. It's one of the best low light cameras that are in Canon's range at the moment. It's obviously 5.9K RAW, so you've got very high quality codec and resolution. And it would fit perfectly with the 6K RAW that they were going to be getting from the drones that they're going to be using, which are another camera system. So, that's a perfect example of, what in that case it was noise, wanted to avoid noise in the dark sky. I think if you're doing multi-camera shoots and you want color consistency from camera to camera, things like the C300 Mark III, the new C70, the R5, all of the kind of more recent camera releases from Canon, they all have the same neutral color matrix, which, assuming you white balance correctly on the cameras and you're in that color matrix, it's spooky how similar they are as you cut between them. Or you might have something where, you're doing like the tabletop stuff that I was doing for Wild Beer. If you wanted some, very sort of abstract, maybe for backgrounds, for motion graphics, you needed extremely high resolution, so you could punch in. You might choose something like the R5 with its 8K RAW. There's all kinds of different considerations, but you need to be kind of working back from that deliverable. What are you trying to achieve, and thinking about how it's going to impact your post-production pipeline as well.
Yeah. And is there anything related to lenses that is important for post-production?
Lenses obviously affect the character and the way it looks. Mostly it's about, from a post point of view and from a colouring point of view, it's about can you achieve the correct exposure. So, for example, this nighttime, drone display, we haven't actually started talking about lenses yet, but it will make far more sense for them to have fast, bright lenses that will reduce the need to go up to higher ISOs, for example. So that has a direct impact on me when I'll be grading that, because we need to be concerned about noise and we need to be concerned about maintaining the exposure that they need to get. So lenses definitely do. From a character point of view, I mentioned the Sumeres earlier. They have a particular character and a look to them, which normally is decided upon based on how it serves the narrative and about the storytelling. But that also has an impact necessarily on the way that it's approached from colour as well.
Yeah, this drone project sounds amazing, by the way.
I'm not looking forward to all the rushes. There's going to be 8 cameras shooting 6K RAW. So, and they're going to be up in Edinburgh and I'm going to be down in Somerset. So there's logistics to work out, but it could be good.
But that is the beauty of what we've evolved to working virtually now. This stuff is important and you've got the kit that enables you to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And let's talk, I've got a question for you. How do you run post-production from home? Got someone intrigued about that.
It's tricky. We have a studio here about sort of 10-15 minutes from where I live, and it's only a small space. In terms of, post-production covers various bases. Obviously, we're mainly set up for colour, which is one of the more difficult. Maybe audio would be the other one, but that's one of the more difficult kind of technically ones that you want to hit. it's about controlling light. You know, we're fully blacked out here, and then introducing the right quality of light. Whether you're editing or color grading, you don't want colored. You don't want tungsten. You don't want kind of colored LEDs. I walked into a grading suite once, and they had like a bright blue light over here, and they were trying to create like this funky kind of space. It's like, this is not helping anyone. You know, 6,500 Kelvin light sources to match the white point of the screens you're looking at. You know, we're pretty compact. Everything is on this desk. Got a nice AV desk. Got the scopes. Got reference monitor. The price of these things is coming down all the time, so it's much easier to be able to build out a really high quality, reference quality post-production environment these days than it was even a few years ago. Prices are tumbling massively, so that's good. It means you don't have to, you know, drop 50 grand just to have an acceptable HD viewing environment. We haven't spent anything like that, and we've got, you know, we just did our first 8K from the R5, in fact, 8K HDR deliverable last week. So we can deliver 8K HDR from this suite, and certainly didn't spend anything like that kind of money on it.
Again, back to that, you know, your career timeline. Again, it must be so fascinating to see how things, like you said, cost so much money, so many zeros, to now come down. Even what Media was saying about SD cards, how they're so much more accessible now. Because back in the day, that was super expensive.
Yeah. It was always the case that unless you had 100 grand to spend on a setup, you just didn't do it. And so, you know, rental facilities, you'd rent out spaces to do this stuff. The idea of doing it just in your own home environment, or a small office, it's crazy, really. We've got a gigabit internet connection here, so you know, we can send files anywhere very, very quickly. We literally don't even think about working remotely. We haven't done for years, but particularly now this year.
Yeah. You know, that sound like the king of working virtually. I need quite notes from you. Media, for listeners, can you talk us through how the workflow of the C300 Mark III differs from the C7 that was launched yesterday? C70, sorry.
Okay, so I think probably the main difference looking at the two cameras is the fact that with the C300 Mark III, you have cinema raw light. The C70 doesn't have that option. But then again, you're not going to need to shoot raw in every single production. It depends on, as I said, as we mentioned before, it depends on the requirements for each filming needs and requirements. And with the C70, you do have XFAVC. With XFAVC, again, you have C-Log 2, you have C-Log 3, and you do actually get a lot when you're shooting with C-Log 2 or 3. To work with in post, so you are getting that flexibility. What I love about the C70 is actually the simultaneous recording. So you can actually record different formats. You can record different resolutions. So you can mix XFAVC, for example, MP4. You can do 4K and 2K. There is an option to record the proxy as well with the XFAVC files, different compressions as well. So you can, for example, record XFAVC all I, so the better quality one for flexibility in post. But you also have the long GOP. So if you need basically a smaller file, you do have that flexibility as well. It is great. I mean, C300 gives you similar, not the exact kind of flexibility, but even with the C300, if you record in cinema raw light, you do have the option to record a proxy. In XFAVC, the same thing. But as I said, the simultaneous recording option on a C70 is great. And I think anyone picking up that camera will probably opt for that, because it does give you flexibility in post. You can basically record different resolutions, different compressions, and then think of what you might do with it later on. So you don't have to worry about it then and then.
Yeah, I like that. It's kind of, I guess it gives people behind the camera the confidence to achieve a bit more without having to waste time thinking about things that they can think about later.
Yeah, and even though it sits below the, excuse me, the C300, both cameras actually have the HDR recording. So with whether you're using a C300 Mark III or using a C70, you have HLG or PQ recording, which is great. I think previously you wouldn't see that in more of an entry-level camera. So now HDR is more accessible to DOPs with limited budget.
Yeah. So just going back to the C70 for a minute and the dual recording, is it possible to record HEVC 10-bit for 22 on one card and HEVC 10-bit for 20 on a second card simultaneously? And if yes, can you do both Canon log and HDR PQ?
You can, so you can set it up to do 422 10-bit, HEVC 422 10-bit, as well as HEVC, loads of numbers, 420 10-bit. So you can actually have it set like that. And then you can choose, because you don't have the standard law, you have C-Log 2, C-Log 3. And then with the HDR, you can choose PQ or you can choose HLG. So you do have that option as well.
Okay. And I've got a final question for you, Ollie. Just to sum up, what does a smooth workflow mean to you? I know you've talked, about what it means to you, but in a kind of end statement, what does a smooth workflow mean to you?
A smooth workflow means zero surprises, basically. It's difficult. I mean, production, post-production, things happen, things go wrong. I went into a shoot I think it was about 3 years ago, and I was actually on screen. So it was a training course I was doing. So there were DPs that were brought in to film it. And so that was not my remit on that particular case. And it was multicam, there were 4 cameras. I won't name names in terms of camera manufacturers, but suffice to say that even though these were all the same manufacturers' cameras, I was the one that was grading this kind of months down the road. I was the one that was doing the color grade, and matching those cameras was an absolute nightmare. And, being sort of surprised and not expecting things in your workflow is where in pre-production you need to plan for it. And we talked about it before in terms of choosing cameras. It's, when it goes wrong, everything grinds to a halt. Everything just becomes compromised, and you really don't want that.
Yeah. Oh, another question for you has just popped in. Do reference monitors matter to you?
Yeah. Short answer. Yeah, absolutely. You can't trust your eyes. We get lulled into a false sense of security with our eyes. We think that they're just perfect. They're really not. There's all kinds of things that trick our eyes every day. And having a consistent light source, so not the sun, because that's not consistent at all. Having a consistent light source and a consistent calibrated reference monitor, they're pretty much the only ways of externally, and scopes, of externally verifying what's actually on screen and not 100% relying on our eyes, which can be fooled quite simply.
Yeah, and have you used Canon's reference monitors?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, this time last year, I'm going to get the name wrong. The DPV 3220, I think, if memory serves.
The 3120.
Sorry, say that again, Media.
The 3120.
Maybe the 3120. Darn it, I got one character wrong, I'm sorry. I was on Canon stand at IBC last year in lovely Amsterdam, and that's their 2000 nit 31-inch reference monitor. Glorious thing, absolutely beautiful. And all of Canon's lineup of reference monitors are fantastic, really, really fantastic. Just what you need. And the tools that are built in as well. People often forget it's not just about a good looking image, it's about what tools are built in with that monitor. And the false color, the HDR waveforms, all of the tools that come with those with the Canon lineup of monitors are really valuable.
Yeah. And I've just got to ask, how do you guys feel about not being at IBC this year? Are you missing the networking, the human interaction, versus what we're doing now virtually online? No, I do. I was saying before we went live, I'm really missing Amsterdam this year. This is the first time in years that I've not gone. It's great. I'm pleased about the impact on the environment. Think of our footprint for this year. It's so much smaller. That's good. That's a positive. But if I'm selfish, I'm missing being in lovely Amsterdam. I love Amsterdam. It's a lovely city. Me too.
I'm missing it, to be honest.
And Media, you were meant to go to IBC for the first time.
Yeah, it was meant to be the first time for me supporting it. But I do actually miss events because I usually have events pretty much on a weekly basis. So I do miss that face-to-face events, interacting with customers. But yeah, IBC would have been an amazing experience based on the number of years I was hearing people telling me all the amazing things about it.
Yeah, well, I think Canon's done a spectacular job of doing things virtually. I know it's not easy, but really, you know, you guys have really thought outside the box to bring such an interactive event. So kudos to Canon. And on that note, that brings us to the end of another Canon Vision Q&A. Thank you so much for submitting all your brilliant questions. I'd like to apologise for anyone who didn't get their question read out. You know, we've only got an hour. There's only so much we can say, so we didn't get a chance to have them all read out. I'd like to give a special thanks to Ollie. Ollie, thanks so much for that deep insight into your career timeline, everything that you do on the front line. It's been really quite fascinating hearing from you, and of course Medea for taking the time to talk all things technical with us. It's been really brilliant hearing from you both, so thank you so much. And of course, thank you to you guys for tuning in and watching. I really hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and really feel like you've got something to take away with you this afternoon and think about. And on that note, all that's left to say is goodbye.